Last year, the first full year after the pandemic shutdowns, 36% of the students in New York City's public schools were considered chronically absent.
36%?
Yeah, that means they're absent more than 10% of the time. Most of us old-timers and even younger people, always believed that you had to go to school and something bad would happen to you if you didn't go to school, right? It wasn't questioned. But now, in the face of the pandemic, if you say to kids, you can learn from home, you can learn remotely, and then, as was the case in New York City, you don't have a functioning remote learning system in place, kids are not stupid. And they pretty much learn, hey, I really don't have to go to school. It's also part of a thing, I think, that many schools have lost the willingness, the ability to hold kids accountable and to hold parents accountable too for making sure that the children come to school. It's not clear what happens to a kid today who's chronically absent.
Hello and welcome to New York Insider. I'm Liam O'Neill. Joining me today is Ray DeMonaco. He is a senior fellow at the Manhattan Institute, where he is also the director of educational policy. Ray, thanks for being on.
Happy to be here.
For your entire life, adult life, you have been involved in education in some form or other.
That's right.
Can you give us a Cliff Notes version of where you are now and where have you been?
So I've spent over 40 years studying, writing about, and commenting on the state of public education and increasingly private education as well in recent years. I'm a New Yorker, born and bred, so I spent a lot of my time focused on the nation's largest public school system, which is New York City. But I've also done things in other states, and in my current position, I'm always on the lookout for schools, be they private, charter, or public, that are doing great work, and sort of publicizing that to kind of keep reminding people that the good is possible in our school system.
Well, that's nice to hear. The good is possible, because recent NAEP scores, our nation's report card, if I'm getting this correct, 3/4 of our students are not proficient in math, as many as 2/3 not proficient in ELA. This is mostly for elementary school. Those are pretty alarming numbers.
They are alarming numbers, and there's another part of that story, and that is both nationally and in New York State and New York City. For a while in the 2000s, the NAEP scores were actually increasing nationwide. Then they leveled off. They started leveling off around 2016, and really didn't move very far in either direction, up or down. But then with the COVID shutdowns, the bottom fell out, and we really lost a lot of ground then.
Oh, so from 2015-16 to 2019,
yeah, things were pretty flat
things were
on the NAEP
flat.
score. Yeah.
I see.
Now that
this
varies.
is speaking nationally.
Yeah, some states improved, others fell, but on average, they were flat.
Okay, and then the bottom fell out to
Right.
the point where I just described. How then does New York fare in? Let's give us a picture for New York schools in the last 10 years.
Okay, I'm going to go back a little bit further just to set the context. Prior to 2002, New York City really had a failing school system. The high school graduation rate was 50%. It was stuck at that level from the first study of that, which I did back in 1983, measured it.
Okay.
So the needle was not moving on high school graduation. I was able to publish a study in the 1990s characterizing about 1/3 of the school districts in New York City as being an educational dead zone. There were no acceptably performing, particularly middle schools in those districts.
1/3.
Yeah, 1/3. 10 out of 32 school districts.
And this is in 19?
This was in the 90s,
Early
80s and 90s.
Okay.
There's a debate going on now in New York City about the renewal of mayoral control. That's up for grabs in our state capital. But mayoral control came in 2002. Michael Bloomberg was elected mayor. That was his first year in office. And during his term, the high school graduation rate went from 50% to over 70%, and now it's at about 78%. Also in New York State, in those years, New York City, historically, New York City always underperformed the rest of New York State. Under his regime, under mayoral control and the reforms that he put in, New York City outperforms the rest of New York State. And so there was a real period of improvement in New York City between 2000 and 2002 and 2012.
Wow.
And then a new mayor came in, undid a lot of the reforms of Mayor Bloomberg, and things stagnated for a while. But then again, nationwide, with COVID, the bottom fell out again.
Okay. That's an incredible story. And I see a parallel with education as you just described it from 2002 to 2012 and crime in New York City.
Yes.
About a decade prior.
Exactly right. Exactly right. So, and the decline in both areas is a function of public policy. If in the crime area, if district attorneys are not going to sanction people for bad behavior, the police naturally are going to pull back, and bad things happen. The same thing is true in the school system. That we had the Bloomberg regime was to hold schools accountable for the performance of students, each year to close schools that were underperforming, and at the same time to foment the creation of new and different types of both public schools in the Department of Education, and also support the development of charter schools. Right. So charter schools went from, like 1,000 kids at the beginning of this time period to now over 100,000 kids in charter schools. About 11% of the population in New York City is in charter schools now.
Currently today.
Yes. And in some districts that were previously part of this dead zone that I call Central Harlem, for example, more than half of the kids are in charter schools. They've been very popular with African American families because they were the one whose kids were suffering under the failing schools.
Wow. So the Bloomberg administration puts in, could you say, school choice? School
choice, accountability.
Accountability,
right.
and the ability to close failing schools.
Yes, exactly.
These are the elements that are put into place.
Right.
And immediately, well, within a decade, we see a pretty dramatic.
We do. Yes, very, very dramatic. And this informed other places around the country. Look to New York.
New York is often the leader, including
and
education.
also here the largest school system. So you saw these reforms adopted in other states and localities as well.
We see dramatic improvement under the Bloomberg administration. He leaves office, and we have de Blasio enter in 2016, right. And he undoes a lot of these reforms.
Yeah, he does two things in his 2 terms. One is he undoes the policy of closing failing schools. We dropped that. He also waters down the data system, the public reporting, in which under Bloomberg, each school was given a letter grade every year, A, B, C, D, or F.
Just like the restaurants.
Pretty much so, yeah. Kind of based on that idea. De Blasio undoes that. There's no more closing of failing schools. He invests over $400 million in trying to fix low-performing schools. It utterly fails. Even he has to admit by the end that they did not move the needle on performance in those schools. So a lot of money was wasted and a lot of good work was undone. In his second term, he also adopts an agenda based on his notion of equity and fairness, that somehow the fact that some students, particularly in middle school and high school, are able to do well with, say, higher level math, algebra, pre-calculus, things like that, is somehow discriminatory against other students, and starts to create this notion that the success of some children in the city is coming at the expense of others. So he's pitting community against community. And
often race against race.
Often race against race, exactly. And so there was an attempt to change the way in which students were admitted to the city's flagship high schools that by law only admit based on a standardized exam score. Tried to change that. He failed. He wasn't able to change that.
Because of community.
Well, community opposition, but the legislature would have to change the law for that to change, and they've been unwilling to do it. I think a lot of them would like to do it, but they haven't been able to
Get the votes.
To get the votes yet. And so this attack on merit and meritocracy as somehow a racist notion takes hold in the city, and so. Under the Bloomberg years, I was working in lower income communities in New York City, and we were very happy that we were getting charter schools and new public schools that better served our communities, well. But in more affluent parts of the city, Manhattan, for example, they were getting middle schools that were teaching advanced subjects, and these middle schools were admitting there was a little bit of screening based on kids' prior performance. De Blasio tried to undo some of that. He was able to do it in Park Slope in Brooklyn. He tried to do it in much of Midtown Manhattan and Lower Manhattan and the Upper East Side. And that battle continues to this day.
Right. So this attack on meritocracy could mean the changing requirements for a number of schools. Park Slope is one that has already done. They've already done away with merit testing.
Merit admissions to middle schools.
Merit admission. They've already done away with that. Other schools, it's on the chopping block. Potentially. But overall there is a shift about merit, right? You're saying, and how does he get away with not closing performing schools? What's the rationale?
The rationale there was that it was a rationale that was not based on the needs of students. It was based on the needs of staff. So in the closure of schools under Mayor Bloomberg, teachers were displaced. Okay, a tenured teacher never lost their job. You can't get rid of a tenured teacher, but they were sort of placed in a holding pen. And the union.
It seems costly.
It was very costly. It was up to like $200 million a year at one point to pay these folks. The union, which had supported Bloomberg's effort in this area very early on, started to feel the heat from their members, and so they just stopped this process of closing schools. And I think it was largely done for the convenience of adults. But it turns a blind eye to the low performance of some schools, and it's saying we can't do anything about that.
Okay, these reforms are put in 2016, 17.
Yeah, starting then. Yeah.
But New York City schools, the performance is not feeling anything until 2020, where the
these battles were going
really
on.
dropped.
Some of the changes weren't made until later. It took de Blasio a couple of years to do this.
Okay.
Right. So the scores, before COVID were still pretty good. It was still better than the rest of the state.
I see.
And then, all kinds of bad things happened.
We hear a lot about fixing schools, and two things usually come up. They need more money. They need smaller class sizes. In these 30 years, 40 years that you're describing, where schools were educational dead zones to being the model of the nation and now receding, how does that graph chart with money given to schools and class sizes?
So in my career, in my lifetime, money always goes up. And we don't see an improvement related solely to money. And then the example I gave before of using a lot of money, $400 million, to try and fix schools that had been identified as failing, completely failed. It did not turn the needle. Mm-hmm. What matters in schools is not the size of the classroom or the dollars per student, within reason. Mm-hmm. It's the culture of the school. Are all of the adults in the building working together towards the same goal, right? Do they trust each other? Do they trust their principal? Leadership is key. A bad principal can ruin a school, even if there are good teachers there, right? So is everyone in sync? Do they believe in the abilities of their students? And are they holding their students to standards of behavior and performance in the classroom. And it's also very important that schools and families be on the same wavelength.
I was going to say the community in the school has to also have some connection
Yes,
with the community at large.
100%. There's a lot of academic research on the importance of trust in schools. Parents need to trust the educators who are spending time with their kids every day. When you drop your child off at the school door in the morning, you want to know that the adults in that building have your child's best interest at heart, and they're going to work with them, right? And also that they see parents as a partner in that exercise. So it's the soft, it's the squishy things that matter in schools. It's not, again, within reason, the number of children in a class or the dollars being spent.
In fact, we have, in our previous conversations, you were talking about how we have maybe educational dead zones returning here in the city. Some of those places have the smallest number of students.
That's right.
And some of the best performing schools are brimming with bodies.
Yeah, there's a debate going on in New York City right now because the state legislature has passed a law which requires New York City, and only New York City, to reduce class sizes. The numbers vary by grade. And they've argued that this is to benefit kids from lower income families and communities. But the data has shown from a number of studies that exactly the opposite is true. In poorer neighborhoods, in low performing schools, people are shunning those schools. So they have very low enrollment, and their class sizes tend to already be low, right? So they're already meeting the standard of a lower class size. The schools that are overcrowded tend to be in more affluent neighborhoods, and they tend to be high-performing schools. Why? Because if the school is high-performing and it's giving a high-quality education, parents don't care what the class size is, and they're fighting to get their kids into those schools. So as this thing plays out, if it is fully implemented, it's actually going to work against the interest of poor kids, because in the better schools, you're going to have to create more classes, hire more teachers there to fill those classes, and the good teachers that are in some of the low-performing schools will seek those jobs. So it's going to be a brain drain in lower-income communities in terms of the teachers.
Rich get rich, the poor get poorer in that case.
Yeah, all in the name of equity.
All in the name of equity. Well, that's interesting. And there's a debate currently going on. I think just months ago, the state legislature passed the legislature passed this law. Is that right?
Yeah. The current debate has to do with that in New York City, but also it relates to a debate statewide. Enrollment is down in New York State and in New York City as well, across the board, and in significant numbers. New York City has about 100,000 fewer kids in New York City Department of Education schools than it had 5-6 years ago. Okay,
that's a 10% decline.
Yes. The governor wanted to change the formula that's used to allocate money to school districts across the state. That formula includes a hold harmless position, which says no matter if enrollment goes down, the allotment to the school in terms of dollars from the state will not go down. Right? And she recently had to concede this. The legislature won't do that. Okay, so in New York State, the legislature has taken the position that no school budget can go down, whatever the drop in enrollment is. And in New York City, the city council has pushed the same agenda in their negotiations with the mayor over the budget. So upstate, you have very small school districts that have declining enrollment, and they're being told by the legislature, you have to keep those schools open, no matter how economically inefficient it is. And in New York City, the same thing. There are a lot of very small schools or very small districts in New York City right now. And this is a deadweight loss of money. This is money that can be put to better uses to help those same kids. This is not the way to get that done, though.
So Bloomberg, one of the things we said is he brought about school choice. And I get the sense that currently you feel to get out of this rut that New York City is in, we can do well by increasing school choice.
Absolutely. The politics of New York are very difficult for things like vouchers or tax credits so that people could use some public money to send their children to private or religious schools. That's always going to be an uphill battle in New York, given the politics of the state. But we did have great success, as I mentioned before, with charter schools, which is a form of school choice, right? They admit their kids on choice, and if they're oversubscribed, they do it through a lottery, right? And you know, parents in New York City love the charter schools, particularly in the poor neighborhoods. They flock to them. But the legislature, with one small exception, has refused to raise the cap on charter schools. They made last year they allowed, I think they're allowing 8 more charter schools to be created in New York City through a technicality in the law. But they're resistant on allowing another flourishing of charter schools because they don't like that kids are leaving the district schools. The union doesn't like that because they represent the members in the district schools. Charter schools typically are not unionized. I don't think any of them are unionized in the city right now. Mm-hmm. And so, but that's another example of the needs of adults being put ahead of the needs of families and parents.
Yeah. Describe where we are exactly with what are the problems facing us here in 2024, post-pandemic. Our NAEP scores are way down. We have dwindling numbers because people have left the city altogether, or maybe they've gone to private or charter schools?
I think a lot of it, I think, is being driven by leaving the city and state for greener pastures. But also the population in the city is changing. The birth rate in New York City has been down for about 10 years now. And so when you look at the schools, you see the real biggest enrollment drops are in the lower grades. Fewer kids entering kindergarten every year. You know, de Blasio gets some credit for creating a universal pre-kindergarten program for 4-year-olds, but even the numbers there are not what they thought it was going to be, right? So some of it is just, look, this may have to do with crime. It may have to do with the cost of living in New York City. People with children, I think, are leaving
It's
the
not
city.
a family-friendly city.
Exactly. So
we also have another problem, chronic absenteeism.
Yeah. Last year, the first full year after the pandemic shutdowns, 36% of the students in New York City's public schools were considered chronically absent.
36%.
Yeah, that means they're absent more than 10% of the time.
Right.
So 18 days a school year. And we're not seeing the bounce back. Nationwide, 26% of the students are considered chronically absent. But in New York City, it's worse. And this is a fundamental problem, right? Kids are not going to achieve if they're not coming to school. Mm-hmm. A lot of this, it varies by grade. But in high schools, you get the sense that kids are sort of dropping out without officially dropping out. They're not engaged in school. They're coming rarely and whatnot. And, it's a big problem. So.
And what accounts for that, do you think? We were speaking before about they lost their mystique, maybe.
Yeah, exactly right. When you think about it, most of us old-timers and even younger people, always believed that you had to go to school. And something bad would happen to you if you didn't go to school, right? It wasn't questioned. But now, in the face of the pandemic, look, the first couple of months, it was understandable. Nobody knew what this disease was and how it was transmitted. So yes, so the spring of 2020, but in New York and elsewhere, it continued into the next school year and even some into the school year after that. And so, if you say to kids, you can learn from home, you can learn remotely. And then, as was the case in New York City, you don't have a functioning remote learning system in place. Kids are not stupid. And they pretty much learn, hey, I really don't have to go to school. Mm-hmm. And so now it's a year later, the schools are open, but I'm not feeling so great today. Maybe I shouldn't have to go in. I could always catch up online or something like that. But we still do not have a functioning online learning system in New York City. There was a potential snowstorm back in February, I think it was, and they closed the schools. And that morning, 800,000 kids tried to sign on, and the system crashed. Right? And first they tried to blame the vendor, IBM, but then it came out that no, this was the DOE's fault. They had to fess up.
Wow.
So, So you have to be careful in the lessons that you give children. They learn, every parent knows this,
Yeah.
right? And if you're not consistent, they catch you on it, they call you on it. And so you say to kids for 2 years, no, you don't have to come. Don't be surprised with what's going on. It's also part of a thing, I think, that many schools have lost the willingness or the ability to hold kids accountable and to hold parents accountable too for making sure that the children come to school.
Yeah.
It's not clear what happens to a kid today who's chronically absent. There are no more truant officers. No one visits your home. So,
But it seems we've been here before. I mean, you're talking about failing dead zones in the 70s, 80s, early 90s, and accountability, closing schools that don't perform, and holding teachers and students, everybody accountable, and having some clear objective standards. That's how we've dug our way out of this before.
I think it's also true when you're talking about adolescents and high school kids. They have to see a reason. They have to see that there's going to be a benefit to them for coming to school. And I think one thing that's happened on a national level and in New York State is that for many years we operated on the belief that the only valued role of high schools was to prepare kids for college. Most folks in our country don't have a college degree. And there are jobs today that are going unfulfilled that you could do if you got some career training, if you got some skills. And some states are moving in this direction. New York State is, but very slowly. And I don't think it's in their heart to offer an alternative pathway to college prep. But you look nationwide, college enrollments are down, even bigger than the demographics. People are getting a sense, when you look at the student loans and whatnot, that it's not worth it. And so I think at the high school level, we have to offer the children multiple tracks. So it's something that will engage them and where they can see a reward after 4 years of high school. Hey, I'll be able to get a decent job doing this.
Again, so would you say it comes down to more choice?
More choice and more diversity in what we offer.
Yeah,
children.
more options to choose
More
from.
options, yeah. Some kids need the advanced math and science. Other kids need something different. Right? And we shouldn't hold everyone to the same standard. That hasn't worked.
Is there any political will for such a shift in New York?
I fear that we haven't hit rock bottom yet in New York City, right? I mean, if the dropout rate starts to creep back up, because again, you have a state legislature and a city council that has moved very far in one direction to the left, and they've taken positions against merit, achievement, and standards, and we're unfortunately we're living the results of that now.
But elsewhere in the country, I mean, in the last year, school choice has really blossomed. I think
absolutely.
8, 9, or 10 states have it.
Yeah, in the last 2 or 3 years, 8 or 9 states have adopted universal school choice in the form of what are called educational savings accounts. Typically what this means is that the state will redirect the amount of money that it puts into schools to parents. And then they could choose. They could send their child to the local public school, and then the money follows the child. They could send their child to a private or religious school, and the money follows the kids. If they're inclined to homeschool, they can use the money to purchase online curriculum or learning materials, books, and things like that.
Wow.
Right? And so that is a trend in Texas, Florida, Arizona. These are all growing states, by the way. These are states that people are going to when they're leaving New York and Illinois and California.
There seems like a real disconnect between
There is.
what people want, what parents want, what families want, and what legislatures and unions and other things are doing.
At the end of the day, we know that parents will go where their child is going to have the best opportunities, right? They'll follow that.
Ray, thanks so much for coming on New York Insider.
Happy to be here. Thank you.